Hello, welcome to my cellar. I got a couple of really interesting comments that I want to address tonight, one of which has had me thinking for a little while. But we'll start with this. I live near Yellowstone, and all the locals can't help but be annoyed with tourists who try to befriend the wildlife. Yellowstone animals are tame in the sense that they're used to humans, but they're still wild animals, and we got a ton of people injured because they got too close to a bison or a bear. Well, my comment on that is, not being a local resident has to deal with all the EMT runs. That's Darwin in action, thinning out the gene pool. Unfortunately, EMTs save too many of those idiots, and they get to keep contributing in their genes. Anybody that's dumb enough to get out of their car and walk up to a bison deserves to get trampled. It's stupid. You're right. They're wild animals. And a bear? Well, those people deserve to be taken out of the gene pool because that's just stupid. Walking up to a bear. Oh, yeah. Hi, look at a pretty grizzly bear. I think I'll go give him a biscuit. Yeah. Okay. Here's one of these that I talked about, thought provokers. And I'm interested to see what some of the other people think. The topic is lapsed clerics. If, for whatever convoluted reason, a cleric renounces their class, what alternate class options would you give the PC? Well, I don't think I've ever dealt with this. I'm certain I've never dealt with this situation myself. I didn't know you could do it. I imagine somewhere in the player's handbook or the DM guide or whatever, there may be something about it. It would make for some interesting flavor and texture in the campaign if this were to happen. If for whatever reason the cleric said, I'm tired of being a cleric, and they wanted to go do something else, well, okay, I'd let them be a fighter, and I wouldn't make them start over at 1 as a fighter. If the cleric had shown a propensity for using a mace or a morning star or one of the cleric-approved weapons, I would allow them to keep their familiarity with that weapon, and however you deal with weapons proficiency and all that, it doesn't make any difference. You're a cleric or you're a fighter, you're swinging that thing. Now, if you want to get into nitpicking about, okay, the fighter's not going to be in full plate, all right, sure, okay, got to learn how to do that, obviously. But you're not going to renounce and don a suit of plate. If you did, well, then there'd be some agility and dexterity type issues to be addressed until you became familiar with it. Maybe if they'd really slid into the opium den drain hole, I'd let them become a thief. Now there they'd have to start just, depending upon their dex, they'd have to start pretty much near the bottom as being a thief. Fighter is more, I can justify that, it's more logical. Now, as far as level, okay, you're a 5th level cleric and you decide you don't want to be a cleric anymore. Well, depending upon your natural 6 stats, you were a 5th level cleric, I think the worst I'd start you off would be a 3rd level fighter, or maybe even 4th, and as I'm going to address later in another question, I'd adjust for your proficiency with a weapon that you've gained in your service as a cleric. You don't want to give them a straight back and forth. If I were the DM in the campaign, I'd only allow it to happen once. No being wishy-washy. You're going to renounce being a cleric, then okay, you can be a fighter, but nothing else. You're not going back. Okay. A relative skill set comparable to what they had as a cleric, with the same weapon. Now, I can justify not doing a straight over, 5 for a 5, by the fact that now they are wearing armor. And that is going to affect their proficiencies. What fallout, if any, would you address towards the PC after renouncing the cleric class? Well, I guess that I can't say I would do this or I would do that. What I'll say is, as the campaign progressed, as things got happening and whatever, I would act appropriately. Now, if they later come to a temple or a shrine to this god or deity that they renounce, okay, run with it, DMs, have fun. If they come to other shrines or temples and show due reverence without ransacking, demolishing, and okay, no different treatment. If they've got some thing going on about being anti-religion, and they go in and they just trash temples, well, yeah, they'd be getting some pretty bad juju stored up. Bad mana. However you want to handle it. But I wouldn't be giving them any favors. All right, next. What are your thoughts on Jeffrey Talanian? He's a really nice guy. I like Jeffrey. And his Hyperborea sword and sorcery tabletop RPG. I really like the Appendix N feel to it. Players are quick to call it a reclone. A 1E clone, but it's more like original D&D circa 76, just prior to first edition of AD&D. Yeah, I like Jeff. I like his system. The only reason I didn't pick it up at some point in time was that I wanted the total, complete, open-ended, bare ass in the breeze OD&D of anything can happen anywhere, etc. I didn't want to structure myself into Hyperborea. However, it's a really interesting world that he's developed. It's a pretty clean system. And I've watched some of his games or games of this game being run at cons, and people are having a great time. If you didn't listen carefully, you didn't know what kind of role-playing game you were walking up on in that regard. They're all having a good time. Could have just been just as easily D&D or something else. The people that like it love it. Look into it. Next. I had a long conversation with a D&D 5e player DM a couple of weeks back. I'd met him through an after-school program where he DM'd for kids staged in their tweens and early teens. In other words, agents of chaos. Outside of this volunteer martyrdom, he had been DMing for his usual group of adult peers. He described the game... Sorry, just a minute. Got dry there. Tongue hung up. The pause that refreshes. Strawberry citrus. Goat juice. All right. He described the gameplay expectations, types of players, and his techniques for delivering gameplay that suited the group. I found some of his ideas similar to your own tips. He shared his techniques to ensure that the min-maxers in the group were kept on their toes, such as changing monster stats interrupting PC's rest breaks and generally creating situations where players feel that their PCs are in actual danger. None of the players are interested in lots of social role-playing, so he concentrates on adventurous challenges. He also maintains the attitude that PC death is always on the table. Good for him. In fact, the end of the campaigns he is currently running will almost inevitably result in the death of the PCs. A lot of what he said reminded me of some of your own advice. Gave me a different view of how people might be playing under the 5e rules. In other words, despite all the changes some folk are playing with OS old school sensibilities, perhaps there are core elements of TTRPGs have not changed. Play to find out. Impossible is rare, but possible. PC fatality is not the end of the world. Good. Death should always be possible, not with 3, 4, infinite number of saving throws. Death should always be there. Great risks for great rewards. That's kind of the basic premise of being an adventurer. Certainly, that's the way we all started out. The second character I rolled up in our AD&D game managed to get psionics, which has opened up a whole can of worms for our game. Even though I have psionics, my character ended up with a fairly low psionic strength score, so going up against psionic creatures has been super risky. Since psionic versus psionic happens at the speed of thought, at most I can get a few segments of delay for the rest of the group to go in and beat down the creature before my psionic character succumbs. I lost Tower of Iron Will through this. Psionics is something that's got to be buffed and trained in and everything. And if you want to do it in your campaign, there's ways you can set it up for their player to go study with a master on their downtime when they're not adventuring. Even while they're maybe healing, I don't see any problem with that. Low level is pretty bad. Anyway, people think psionics is overpowered, but it's really just another way to get your character. It's another way for your character to get killed. True enough. If they happen to survive long enough to face a mind flare or some powerful demons, that's pretty much it for my character. Well, yeah, it wasn't supposed to be a primary strength. It was actually, when I formulated it, I went to Gary and said, I want to do an NPC psionicist. Someone's trained in it, a wandering, the equivalent of a wandering hedge wizard. But he wasn't up for that. He just wanted to see a system that could be learned and possibly fight back against brain moles, thought eaters, and mind flayers. Too bad. You can do it, though. You can put a psionicist as an NPC in your stable of potential NPCs. Because I always thought it was just D&D luck. If you're getting ready to go out on an adventure that you just, swallow the hook and the worm on, and you happen to run along somebody along the way that you could hire for an exorbitant price who would really help your party. Back in the day, that was usually a hedge wizard of 3rd, maybe 4th, sometimes even 5th level. That would require an exorbitant portion of the success of the party, including all magic items. However, if none of you were magical or could do what he could do, it might have been worth the investment. I kind of saw psionicist as that too. Kind of a wandering Doctor Strange. You can do that. You can Find a guru in the mountains not too far away, hidden in a valley that nobody goes in, not that far away from where your party recuperates, or where its hangout is, or whatever its base. If you want to do that for the person who has psionics, why not? If you're going to let fighters train, why not? Yeah, mind flares are bad news. Unless you have high level psionic skills. Okay, here it is. When familiars attack. On large feline familiars, I'm reminded of the graphic novel The Rabbi's Cat, now a movie apparently, which has a story about an aged traveler and his equally aged lion companion, both con artists. The lion harasses the local. The man rescues him from the lion by his commanding presence alone. The grateful folks pay the man, and he shares his payment, food, with the lion. Okay. Symbiosis is one way of handling large familiars. You have to feed them. More importantly, you have to benefit them socially. The old lion can no longer fend for itself, so it benefits from the relationship. Yeah, but first off, I would not allow any character class, not even a druid, to bond with a fully grown animal unless by some supernatural means. Those of us who live in the real world, go look on Facebook and see how many videos you find of people finding baby animals, infants, newborns, feeding with a bottle, brushing them, taking care of them. The lady that rescued the little tiny kitten that fit in her hand that became a 40-pound bobcat. Raised by hand from infancy, a bond like that could develop. But the bond has never been stressed. The bobcat's never been faced to defend the house against an intruding raccoon or something like that. But there's a bond. And so once that bond is established, while it's being established, the familiar would have to be trained. Now, the obvious exception is the familiar that's granted to a magic user through a deed or a spell or a boon. But don't expect, if that happens, don't expect to get a lion. Expect a squirrel or a weasel or a stoat for your Brits. Or a wolverine at best. Even that, a wolverine. That'd be interesting. Yeah, you have to have a bond. You have to have some sort of symbiosis there. The animal protects you, you feed the animal. However, the animal will probably go out and feed itself, so there again, as a DM, you'd have to determine the level of the bond, the depth of the bond. Okay, here we go. The economy. It's tough now to try to get younger players acclimated to an economy where cash is much more valuable than it is now. I'm old enough to remember when a comic book or a hamburger was 12 cents. Got you beat there. I remember dime comics. The other concept is barter rather than a cash economy. Most of Western Europe ran on a barter system for several thousand years. Wouldn't that be boring? So it's almost a prerequisite that if you're going to have murder hobos or tomb raiders, they need to function in an economy that recognizes the values of what they find or steal or otherwise purloin. I believe that's just a given. So, a barter economy, Now, if at some point in the future they go through a funny looking window or something like that to somewhere else and find themselves in a barter economy, that could be fun. But I don't think you need to start them in that, because there's no benefit to be gained from going out and risking your life digging up old tombs looking for treasure. One's kind of going to have the other. All right, further on. The other concept is, barter. Yeah, that was probably 600 years of Western Europe. And paying in kind. The writer says he finds this fun, but many younger players have been trained to expect a more Monty Hall experience. Well, that's, I believe I mentioned the last time I talked about economy. That's why you need, at the very beginning, to establish a basic unit of sustenance, a bowl of pottage, a crust of bread, and a drink of potable ale or beer. What does that cost? And from that, you go both ways on your cost charts and figure it out. You need to have that figure in your mind. Now, if you decide that it costs 15 coppers for a mug of ale, finding 4,000 coppers in a big hoard somewhere is a relatively large amount of cash. If you put too much cash into flow as a DM, if you increase M, you're going to have inflation. And if you influx a bunch of loot all at once, a good DM is going to see if it attracts ne'er-do-wells, robbers, thugs, and thieves. Or maybe those are all the same thing. But cash, yes. You don't have letters of credit. You don't have plaques. You have specie, the coins of the realm or realms. And you have gems and jewelry, more portable wealth, things of value. You might have a beautiful chalice, and you carry it around until somebody offers you a stupendous amount of money, or what to you is a stupendous amount of money. But yeah, it's got to be on a cash basis. Can't be on debits and credits. And you were trained to accept a money currency debt system where people from 8,000 BC would say, I remember when I didn't have to pay for crap. We had a sharing gift economy. Had no ancient gangsters running a protection racket over me and my bandmates, as they were conscripting our hunting land for cities and farming and inheriting. When currency and debt toil is your system to make an elite few rich, people are going to love striking it rich through the path of least resistance, because that is the teleology of your culture. Yes, and there again, striking it rich is a big deal and therefore should be very hazardous, and the chance of death be very, very real. Just saying. My view on the topic. All right, bringing up verisimilitude in the Middle Ages and the volatility of currencies in the post-industrial revolution you may have, leads me to share this interesting fact. The cost of a pig, for example, in the Middle Ages was unchanged for generations. People grew up knowing what things cost in the same sense as they knew the sun would rise. Things just were the price they were. And that's fine. That's a good point. In a normal functioning thing, that normal functioning culture and society. But when the swine in that area caught a swine disease and started dying off, those pigs became more valuable. So it can always change. The standard of currency can always be diminished, or it can be elevated. Another interesting thing to think about is there really wasn't the free movement of people in the Middle Ages that we experience today. That's right. Until the Black Death. The Black Death changed, killed feudalism, changed society. It certainly changed England. And as far as I can tell, most of the other educated/civilized countries of Western Europe, because there were no barriers. If a serf wanted to take over an abandoned plot of ground, he could become his own master, and there was nobody there to tell him he couldn't. I read a couple of really interesting fiction books about this period of time, and it kind of opened my eyes up to just what a profound experience the Black Death had in Europe. It broke down all the barriers, shattered them. Took a long time to re-stratify. Certainly in England, one was pretty much confined to the parish, duchy, principality, etc. that one was born in. In fact, one had to petition the local priest or authority in order to leave the area. Yeah, authority being the owner, who also pretty much owned you. Stability was the order of the day, therefore introducing wandering murder hobos and metric shit tons of cash into the economy would probably have caused so much upset that the PCs would be tantamount to an invading force, having to take control of the area they wanted to hole up in. Or at least that's one possible income. That's right. You have to, when you're designing this, and you're deciding how much of what you're going to put in, okay, whether it's going to be crude jewelry and worth a little, or the finest gold work and worth a lot. You have to tailor this, and it has to be correspondable. I don't think that's a word, but it's got to be able to correspond. The point being that economies are stagnant within stable societies with little or no vertical movement. That's right. That's correct. And you might not have to follow that if it's a fantasy, right? But all good fantasy is rooted in reality as a stepping off point, as a point of reference. There has to be enough to convince you that this could be real. Isn't that what good fantasy writing is? We can just kind of immerse ourselves, slip into it. But it's got to have an interior logic. The story has to have an interior logic. If you're talking about a world, it has to have an administrative / running system. How's it work? Let's see. Oh, conversely, it would be really fun to hold fast to the idea of moribund stagnation and see what happens when the paradigm is changed by a group of adventurers lucked into more money than the local economy sees for a generation. What disturbances would that cause, and how does the PCs extricate themselves? And how do you get to go out and root it? Those are all good. Those are all good points, and they're all possible strands of yarn in what you're weaving. Whether they're warp or woofed, warp or weft or warp, up this way or that way, it doesn't. They all need to be there in what you're weaving, the story you're weaving. It's fun and I'll be the first to admit it. When we first got into the game, way back in the Dark Ages, we just went out and adventured and killed shit and took their stuff. And then there came a time when we restarted the campaign, so to speak. I adapted the Greyhawk conventions out of there, and we added that into our world. And that changed it somewhat, but we still had a great time. And when we rebooted the campaign, we had even more fun because now we were doing it right. Do your most memorable and unique players, for positive reasons, share certain traits? Any special one-time DM to player interactions you've had with strangers? I would say that the favorite players that I've had the pleasure of DMing, whether it was down in Carbondale or here in Cincinnati, were the ones that were inquisitive and asked questions and pestered me. And that's okay. And occasionally I go, okay, yep, you're right, okay, this is it, and we'd go on. The people that acquire information do better than the people who sit back on their asses and wait for some magical light bulb to go off in their head from their skill or ability. I enjoy those players. I enjoy the player that's willing to try something different. Think outside the box. I once ran I'll tell you a great story that actually worked. I was once running a Wheel of Blame game. I think it might have been out in Boston at TotalCom. And these guys found themselves facing an enormous wall of thorns. And the only movement was these giant butterflies coming over and getting nectar out of these giant flowers that they were on their side and flying back over the thorn wall to the other side. And so one of the players he looked at me dead serious, says, I'm going to strip off all my clothes and have them smear nectar all over me. I'm going to lay down here. And I looked at him and I said, yeah, they'll come see me, and because I'm absolutely covered in nectar, they'll carry me over to the other side. And so I made a series of determinations for how likely that was to happen and how likely that it would end well and everything, and I'll be damned if it didn't happen and it ended well. That's the kind of stuff I like. Off-the-wall, wild ideas. Even if they don't work, think outside the box. The box can be so boring and confining. The other players that I love are the ones that are optimists, like Deathless Bob, whose story I've told many times. Kept coming back to the table, ready to play again, a big smile on his face. One time DM'd a player, one time at a Gary Con. I had a guy muttering at the end of the table and muttering at the end of the table, and I asked him at one point, I need to mutter some more. Finally, he stood up, walked toward my end of the table and said, you can't do that. And I looked at him and I said, excuse me? And then he said, you can't do that. That's not in the rules. And he really thought that I couldn't do what I wanted to do in my game. This was several years ago, long before 5E's rigidity. He was absolutely a rules as written player, obviously. And I finally got him to leave. After offering him the moon, the stars, and the sun, I finally got him to leave. He was young, probably still in high school, but the point being, DM can do whatever they want. Let's see. Okay, I got a couple more here, and we're done. As far as skills go in my games, I don't really like the D&D 3.5 Pathfinder huge skill list, with skill point progression and buffing skills as the player advances. I prefer a more ad hoc approach with the PC skills being based on their background. Yes, I've been thinking about this as I go on here for quite a while this afternoon. So if the PC grew up on a farm, then they have skills associated with that background. They know how to care for animals. They can probably ride a horse, hitch up a team to wagon, drive the wagon, diagnose and treat minor injuries or illnesses in their horse. But they probably don't know much about sailing boats. Good point. How do you treat the now typical skills list with proficiency ratings? I think they're garbage. Okay. Your 6 basic stats give you the basis for everything you need to know. I like the idea, and I have used the idea in a different degrees, that if you're going to come to the table with your one level character, first level character, fun level character, and say, "Hi, I'm Jacob. I grew up on a farm. I decided that, after my parents died, it was time to seek my fortune in the world, and I brought with me this big scythe and this old rusty shield that's hung on the wall in my hovel for generations." And so, if there's a way to transfer their known skills. All right, let's take another. I'm a woodcutter's son. I cut wood with my father and made charcoal in the woods. One day while I was out marking trees, he was killed by some thugs, yada, da, da, da. So, the woodworker's son, I'm sure, has handled hatchets and axes. To show his proficiency, coming from that background, I would undoubtedly give him pluses on hitting, because he knows how to handle it, he knows where the weight is, and possibly even a lesser plus on damage, because if you've got a woodcutter, you know how to keep the edge of the axe where you want it to go. You know how to turn the head, etc., etc. So you have some minor basic facility with that weapon, the axe. Now, go into a sword and stuff like that, then you're going to start out at the bottom. But if you can make a case, if you come from a grain farmer and you're used to handling those big, long grain rakes, I'd have no trouble giving you a little bit of a proficiency with a spear. Not a problem. And again, they're starting out as first levels, or whatever method your campaign uses. You're only adding to the pluses to hit and possibly adding to the damage that it does. Why not? Seems like a pretty keen idea to me, and it really is only gonna affect fighters. Druids are celibate, supposedly. Magic users are too busy. Well, maybe might be the son of a cleric and have a familiarity with the Book of Prayer for so-and-so, such a deity that when your father... Okay, you can see what I'm going there. It's not wrong to consider a first or lowest level beginning player's background to possibly give them a boost here or there, a little fudge. Except it's not a fudge if you decide as a DM that they have this. And as they go up in levels, you can take that away. When they change a weapon, you can take that away. But when they're real low levels and scrapping for their very lives, I say give them an edge, even if it's only a tiny dull one. All right, and the last. I noticed you skipped Thief in your list of core classes that you did and did not like. Thoughts? I've always been really troubled by the Thief on a number of different levels. Level 1, if he really is an adept thief, he's going to pick the pockets of his group. He's going to palm the best gem when he opens the chest. Because if he's going to be a thief, I don't see that coming down on the good side of the alignment. At best, neutral. At best. I have had, my party at Carmondale had a thief who never stole from the party because they were like sword brothers from the very beginning, and they just didn't do that. And yet I've run games at cons when the thieves thought it was perfectly okay to pilfer everybody's pockets when they weren't looking and constantly pass me notes. I've always been ambivalent about the thief. I guess the idea of a rogue who's adept at sleight of hand, lock-picking, wall climbing, gate scaling. Even though I didn't like the name change when it was done, I can see now why it was done, and I think I can embrace the class a little harder because it's been done. Because a rogue is still probably not very far on the good side of the alignment charts. Might be lawful in that he has certain rules that he won't steal from the poor, he won't steal from churches, you know. Again, it's up to you to discern. But when it comes down to taking things that aren't your own, there has to be a justification, or it's intrinsically a bad act. I've always been ambivalent about them. I still am. I really don't know. Excuse me, itchy nose. But I guess that's all I got to say for tonight. So until the next time, Dodata Gobi. Hello, and welcome to my cellar.
The Curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs. Still quite a feller, the Curmudgeon in the cellar.
Last man around when them rates went down. Calling Gary in that Lake Geneva town. Hey Gary, it's an awful mess. Let me edit, we'll have success. D&D and Dragon Magazine.
He's the Curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the Curmudgeon in the cellar.
Magic missile, it's a mortar shell. Make it hit in the first level spell. Brought Psionics to the game to attack that wizard's brain. ESR and fantasy, collection of micro armory, Titan with tramp under a tree,
High as could be. He's the Curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.